When we look at like a massive suspension bridge or a towering skyscraper, we immediately understand the engineering.
Oh, yeah, completely. It's right there in front of you.
Right. We intuitively know the steel beams, they have to hold thousands of tons, and the cables have to flex in high winds. I mean, the glass has to withstand these dramatic temperature changes.
Yeah, the structural engineering is it's totally visible. It is obvious.
Exactly. But right now, completely out of sight, like inside the human body, that exact same level of rigorous, microscopic mechanical engineering is happening.
It really is.
And today we're taking a deep dive into this hidden, highly technical physics behind two increasingly popular intimate aesthetic procedures. We're talking about the labial puff and G-spot augmentation.
Yeah, and looking at the stack of sources we have for you today, it's a wild mix.
It really is. I mean,
Yeah.
we are pulling from polymer physics, rheology lab testing, clinical studies on female sexual function, and, some very advanced aesthetic medicine protocols.
It's a fascinating intersection of fields because usually we think of physics and aesthetics as two entirely separate worlds. But here, they just completely rely on each other.
They do, and to speak directly to you, the listener, for a moment, you might think of dermal fillers merely as, like, cosmetic plumping agents.
Right, just a simple gel in a syringe.
Exactly. But these gels are actually highly engineered viscoelastic materials. So today, you are going to discover exactly how the microscopic behavior of hyaluronic acid is mathematically customized to withstand the intense and honestly sometimes violent mechanical forces of the human body.
Oh yeah, the forces are intense.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the fundamental physics, specifically this term that comes up in every single source, which is rheology.
Right, rheology.
Right.
So rheology is essentially the branch of physics that studies how materials deform and flow under force.
Okay.
Because when you inject a gel into human tissue, it doesn't just, sit there in a vacuum.
Right, it's not a static environment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It is subjected to constant, relentless physical stress. I mean, it gets compressed, it gets stretched, it gets sheared. So to survive, the filler has to possess very specific properties.
And the sources use a really brilliant, highly visual analogy to explain this concept of viscoelasticity. They compare the elasticity of a gummy bear to the viscous flow of honey.
I love that analogy. It's so good because it perfectly illustrates the dual nature of these gels.
Right.
A hyaluronic acid filler has both properties simultaneously. It has a viscous, fluid-like component, which is the honey, and that allows it to actually, be pushed out of a tiny needle and spread into the surrounding tissue.
This is important, yeah.
Right. But it also has an elastic, solid-like component, the gummy bear part, which allows it to basically bounce back to its original shape after something presses down on it.
So it's literally like honey and a gummy bear mixed together.
Pretty much, yeah.
But how do researchers actually measure that? Because in the lab tests provided in our sources, there are a bunch of specific metrics, and the one that just dominates the conversation is G prime, which is also known as the elastic modulus.
Right, G prime. So think of G prime, which is written in the literature as a G with an apostrophe, as the gel's bounce back factor.
Okay, bounce back factor.
Yeah, it measures the material's ability to resist deformation. If you have a filler with a very high G prime, it behaves much more like a solid. It provides significant structural support and lift.
But wait, if high G prime means better lift and a stronger ability to resist forces, I mean, wouldn't aesthetic practitioners just use the absolute highest G prime filler for every single procedure?
You'd think so, right?
Yeah, I mean, why wouldn't you always want the strongest material possible?
Well, because the human body isn't a static statue.
Oh, right.
If you put a highly elastic, incredibly firm gel into a very dynamic superficial area of the body, let's say the lips, or just right under the surface of the skin, it would be a total disaster.
Oh, wow.
It would feel like a rock, it would be stiff, it would form these visible lumps, and it just wouldn't move naturally when the person smiles or speaks. The tissue moves, so, the filler must move with it.
Ah, okay. So you can't just build a concrete wall under the skin. You need what the papers call viscoelastic balance.
Exactly, viscoelastic balance. The formulation of the filler has to perfectly match the anatomical demands of the specific tissue it's going into.
All right.
And to understand how scientists achieve this balance, we really have to look at how these gels are manufactured. Because natural hyaluronic acid, the kind your body naturally produces, actually dissolves in about 12 to 24 hours.
Wait, really? That fast?
Yeah, it's incredibly short-lived.
Which obviously wouldn't be very useful for a long-term aesthetic procedure.
Not at all. So to make it last for months or even years, manufacturers use chemical binding agents. You'll see acronyms in the research like BDDE or PEG.
Okay, BDDE and PEG.
Right. And these agents act like microscopic zip ties. Imagine you have a massive bowl of cooked spaghetti, and that represents the natural hyaluronic acid chains.
Okay, cook spaghetti. I'm with you.
If you just press on the spaghetti, it just turns into mush, right?
Yeah, totally.
But if you take thousands of tiny plastic zip ties and bind those individual noodles together into this massive interconnected 3D web, the entire structure becomes resilient.
Oh, that makes total sense. That's a great visual. And the density of those zip ties, the cross-linking, that determines the G prime.
It determines the G prime, yes, but also the viscosity, which is measured by G double prime.
Okay, G double prime.
Yeah, G double prime is the loss modulus. It measures how much energy is basically dissipated as heat when the material is deformed. So essentially, it's how thick the fluid part of the gel is and its resistance to just flowing away.
Got it.
And when you divide the viscous part by the elastic part, you get what's called tan delta. A low tan delta means the gel is highly elastic and bounces back. A high tan delta means it's more fluid and spreadable.
And we can't forget cohesivity, right? Because the sources heavily emphasize that G prime and cohesivity are not the same thing at all.
Oh, they are very different, and cohesivity is vital here. Cohesivity is simply how strongly the gel particles stick to one another.
Okay.
Think of magnetic putty. If a filler is highly cohesive, it holds together in one uniform mass, and it doesn't migrate or splinter off into the surrounding tissue. But if it has low cohesivity, it just separates really easily.
Okay, so if the cross-linking zip ties and the cohesivity basically dictate how the gel behaves, and the gel's behavior has to perfectly match the environment, let's look at a very specific environment.
Let's do it.
Let's look at the external anatomy, so the labia majora. What is the actual clinical need for the labial puff procedure in the first place?
Well, the clinical need often stems from a condition called hypertrophy. Due to things like aging, childbirth, massive weight fluctuations, or significant hormonal drops, particularly around menopause, the labia majora can lose its natural volume.
Yeah.
The tissue literally deflates and thins out because it's losing its structural fat and collagen.
And the sources are very clear that this isn't just an aesthetic concern, it's a highly functional, often really painful problem. Because the labia majora acts as a natural cushion.
Exactly.
When that volume is gone, women experience real discomfort from passive, everyday, compressive friction. I mean, we are talking about the friction from just wearing tight clothing, riding a bike, horseback riding, or even just sitting at a desk for long periods.
Yeah, the natural shock absorbers are essentially just gone. And the clinical data we reviewed, it shows that treating this specific area with hyaluronic acid fillers doesn't just visually plump the tissue, it actively restores that functional barrier.
Right, the functional barrier.
There's a randomized controlled study in our stack looking at 76 women suffering from labia majora hypertrophy.
Oh, right, I saw that one. And they used a couple of specific metrics to track the success. They used the GAIS, the Global Aesthetic Improvement Scale, and the FSI.
Right. So the GAIS is basically the standardized visual grading system that doctors use to measure the appearance before and after. And the women treated with the HA fillers saw massive improvements there at the 6-month mark.
Oh, wow, 6 months.
Yeah. But more importantly for the patient's daily lives, they reported significantly improved scores on the FSFI, which is the Female Sexual Function Index.
Okay.
This is a really detailed questionnaire that measures things like arousal, lubrication, and pain. The scores improved dramatically simply because the natural cushioning and hydration were restored.
Okay, so we know it works clinically. But let's look at the physics of how it works. What specific rheological properties does a filler need to survive in the labia majora?
Well, this is where it gets tricky.
Because we are talking about an area subjected to constant passive squeezing, right? Like if I sit on a bicycle seat, I am applying steady compression to that tissue.
Right, and this is exactly where cohesivity absolutely takes precedence over high G prime stiffness, because the labia majora requires natural movement, so it needs to remain soft and pliable. If a doctor were to inject a rigid high G prime filler, like the kind used to simulate bone on a jawline, into the labia, it would feel like having hard marbles trapped under the skin.
That sounds incredibly painful.
It would be awful. Instead, the filler needs to be really soft, but possess extremely high cohesivity.
Ah, so the magnetic putty idea.
Exactly. The gel particles must stick together fiercely so they don't migrate or just split apart under the pressure of that bicycle seat. But at the same time, they must integrate smoothly into the mucosal tissue to mimic natural fat and flesh.
The chemical engineering required to pull that off is just wild.
It is.
Because the sources detail a couple of specific products formulated just for this, like Novia Rose and Deserial. And they don't just use hyaluronic acid, they actually add some fascinating compounds.
They do. Let's look at Novia Rose. It uses PEG as its cross-linking zip tie, but it also integrates specific amino acids directly into the gel matrix, specifically glycine and L-proline.
And what do those actually do mechanically? Like, why are they there?
Well, glycine and L-proline are building blocks of natural collagen. But in this filler, they act almost like localized osmotic sponges.
Osmotic sponges.
Yeah, they stabilize the hydrogel network by regulating how much water the hyaluronic acid absorbs. Because HA naturally pulls in water. But you don't want the filler to pull in so much water that it drastically swells and overinflates the tissue post-injection.
Oh, right. That would be bad.
Right, so these amino acids control that swelling, keeping the highly concentrated gel dense, but still really cohesive.
That is brilliant. And Deserial takes a totally different approach, right, by incorporating mannitol. Now, I've heard of mannitol in other medical contexts, but what is it doing inside a labial filler?
Yeah, so mannitol acts as a powerful antioxidant, specifically a free radical scavenger. Because when you inject anything into the body, or when tissue is subjected to heavy friction, it triggers mild inflammation.
Right.
That inflammation produces free radicals. Think of them as microscopic buzzsaws that want to chop up those hyaluronic acid spaghetti chains.
Oh, I love that. Microscopic buzzsaw.
Right. So mannitol acts as a bodyguard. It takes the hits from the buzzsaws, protecting the HA chains from snapping, which basically stops the filler from degrading too quickly, all while helping deeply hydrate the surrounding tissue.
Wow. So if I can synthesize this for you listening, for the labia majora, we aren't trying to build a rigid cheekbone. We're essentially engineering a highly cohesive, deeply hydrating memory foam mattress pad.
That's exactly it.
It needs to absorb every day, passive friction, regulate its own moisture, and bounce back slowly without ever losing its soft shape.
And what's fascinating here is how the mechanical integration of the filler actually changes the biological environment. It isn't just taking up space,
Yeah.
It is actively restoring the mucosal elasticity and reducing irritation at a cellular level.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because if the labia majora is all about absorbing slow, passive compression, what happens when a filler is subjected to intense, repetitive, active shear friction?
Oh, it's a completely different game.
Right, this takes us inside the body to the anterior vaginal wall and the physics of the G-shot.
Yes. The environmental demands just shifted drastically here. We are no longer dealing with a slow, passive squeeze like sitting on a bike. We are dealing with a high-energy, dynamic, repetitive shear force. The physics required to survive this are entirely different.
So let's outline the clinical goal of G-spot augmentation. The procedure basically involves injecting a human-engineered collagen or a highly specialized hyaluronic acid directly under the mucosa of the anterior vaginal wall.
Right.
And the goal is to enlarge the G-spot to about the size of a quarter and physically project it downward by roughly the width of a pencil eraser.
Exactly. The intention is that this physical projection magnifies sensitivity and dramatically increases the chance of direct contact during intimacy.
But the mechanical challenge of actually holding that projection seems immense to me. Because the sources mention the filler is placed against something called Halban's fascia. What is that?
So Halban's fascia is a layer of connective tissue situated right between the bladder and the anterior vaginal wall. Think of it as a dense, fibrous backboard. It's relatively rigid. So the filler is sandwiched right between this rigid backboard and the superficial mucosal tissue. And during coitus, this specific area is subjected to heavy localized pressure and extreme sliding shear friction.
So if we used our memory foam mattress pad from the Labial Puff in this environment, what would actually happen?
Well, if you press a soft, highly fluid gel against a firm backboard and apply intense sliding friction, it just smears.
Like it just flattens?
Yeah, it acts like peanut butter.
Yeah.
It will simply succumb to the pressure, spread out, flatten completely, and fail to provide any of the targeted elevated stimulation the procedure is meant to create.
Oh, wow. So what is the brachiological solution? How do they engineer a gel to actually survive that peanut butter effect?
The solution is a mandatory requirement for a high viscosity, high G', cross-linked hyaluronic acid.
High elastic modulus.
Exactly. Because G prime measures the ability to resist deformation,
Yeah.
right? So a high G prime allows the gel to behave almost like a solid implant. When the heavy coital friction hits it, the high G prime filler absorbs the energy but forcefully springs back to its original shape instantly.
Okay, so instead of memory foam bed, we are building something more like the rubber tread of a tire.
Oh, yeah.
Something engineered specifically to take relentless, high-energy, sliding friction, bounce back immediately, and never ever lose its structural integrity.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. Unlike the labia majora, which prioritizes soft integration, the G-shot filler needs to maintain sharp, distinct structural definition. It has to hold that quarter-size shape and that pencil eraser depth against that rigid fascia, no matter how much shear force is applied.
And this brings up a really critical point from the clinical reviews regarding patient outcomes, and what happens when the physics actually fail.
This raises an important question indeed, because if a clinician is reviewing a patient who reports a complete loss of palpable filler volume within, say, 8 weeks of receiving a G-shot, well, the first thing they have to investigate is the rheology of the product used.
Right, like was the G prime high enough?
Exactly.
Because if the practitioner used a low G prime filler, like the soft, squishy kind designed for superficial hydration, it didn't just metabolize and disappear in 2 months, right?
Right. It didn't necessarily dissolve at all. The mechanical extrusion and shear forces of the vaginal wall simply flattened it out. The filler was mechanically defeated by the environment.
Mechanically defeated. Wow.
Yeah, it was crushed out of shape simply because it lacked the elastic modulus to fight back against the backboard of Halban's fascia.
So what does this all mean? Let's bring this all together and directly compare these two procedures side by side.
Let's do it.
Because if you think about it, the labial puff is fundamentally about integration and cushioning. You are using highly cohesive, low to medium G-prime hydrophilic fillers to restore a soft, natural, moisture-rich barrier against passive compression.
Right.
But the G-shot is pure structural engineering. It relies on extremely high G-prime elasticity to build a firm, targeted, rubber-like shock absorber that just refuses to flatten under active, repetitive shear pressure.
That perfectly summarizes the physics. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it highlights exactly why you cannot blindly swap these medical devices. The rheology dictates the anatomy, and the anatomy dictates the rheology.
So let's actually play that disaster scenario out. What happens if a practitioner ignores the physics and gets it backwards? Like, what if they inject a low G-prime, highly fluid filler meant for the soft cushioning of the labia into the G-spot?
You get immediate failure. The intense coital shear forces would cause that soft gel to just spread, flatten, and lose all downward projection almost instantly. The patient wouldn't experience the sensory amplification they were looking for at all because the physical structure would just be gone.
Right, it just turns to peanut butter.
Exactly.
And if we do the reverse, if a practitioner takes that highly elastic, rigid, high G-prime structural filler meant for the internal G-shot and injects it into the superficial tissues of the external labia majora.
Oh, you would get a disastrous aesthetic and functional result. Because the labia tissue is delicate and requires flexibility, a high G-prime filler would feel terrible.
Right, the marbles under the skin.
Yeah, it wouldn't integrate into the mucosa.
Yeah.
It would feel like hard lumps or firm nodules. And it would be incredibly uncomfortable during daily activities like sitting or walking, which entirely defeats the purpose of trying to restore the labia's natural soft cushioning. Viscoelastic balance is everything. You have to match the zip ties to the physical stress.
It is truly staggering to think about the level of precision happening at a molecular level just to allow a clear gel to survive inside our bodies.
It really is.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the microscopic world of polymer physics and intimate aesthetics, because as we've seen, a successful procedure isn't just about the injection itself. It's about mathematically matching the precise viscoelastic properties of a gel. Its G-prime, its cohesivity, its viscosity, to the unique localized mechanical stresses of the human anatomy.
It truly is the ultimate marriage of biology and material science.
And before we go, I want to leave you with a final forward-looking thought that really builds on everything we've read in these clinical sources, because one of the papers we reviewed detailed a novel method for measuring vaginal wall thickness using transvaginal biplanar ultrasound.
Oh, yes.
They were literally mapping the tissue down to the millimeter to diagnose atrophy.
Yes, and doing so with incredible accuracy and inter-observer reliability, too.
Right. So consider this. Could these high-frequency ultrasound mapping techniques soon be used in real time to track a patient's exact friction points during dynamic movement?
Oh, that's an interesting thought.
Imagine a near future where aesthetic doctors use that live ultrasound data to custom engineer the precise G prime and cohesivity of a hyaluronic acid gel right there in the clinic. Perfectly tailored to your unique anatomical mechanics before the needle even touches the skin.
Wow. Custom synthesized rallarology based on real-time ultrasound mapping. That would absolutely be the next frontier of personalized medicine. I mean, we are already engineering the gel for the general area, so engineering it for the individual specific biomechanics is the logical next step.
It really makes you look at the human body and the science we use to treat it in a completely different way. Just like we expect perfection from the steel and glass of a skyscraper, we are now engineering that same structural perfection on a microscopic level completely out of sight. Keep questioning the science behind everyday medicine, keep looking deeper, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.